Kate Mila, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's the week of Halloween. I'm not sure what day I'm going to put this up. And Deborah Lupien and I are going to be getting together to do a little exploration of the lives of a number of people that we are loosely relating to Halloween. And because we got a lot of requests to cover the life of Joan Crawford, and because the only movie that I really like involving Joan Crawford was the one she was not in, Mommy Dearest, with Faye Dunaway playing Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford is considered iconic actress of Hollywood. I hate to say this, never my favorite, but she had a very interesting life, and I know a lot of people absolutely love her. The thing about movies, it's kind of like dessert and fashion. It's taste. It's all a matter of personal taste. And one person's very favorite movie star might just leave somebody else flat. So I acknowledge that Joan Crawford gave much to early Hollywood. Her importance cannot be denied. And she was an interesting person. So let's look at her life. Now, this is really funny because her real name is not Joan Crawford. That's her stage name. Her real name sounds like a stage name. And they made her change it because, as I think Louis B. Mayer said, it sounds like sewer. So she was born March 23rd. Nobody knows exactly what year because she lied about her age and falsified it on any number of documents. So somewhere between 1904 and 1908. Not a good way to start out, in my opinion. But her real name was Lucille Fleur, as in flower, Le Sueur. The sewer, Louis B. Mayer said. She was born in San Antonio in Texas. Her father was a construction worker. Her mother was just 20 when Crawford was born, and I'm going to use her stage name. It's too confusing. She had a half-sister, Daisy, and a brother, Hal. Her father left the family when Crawford was 10 months old. And in 1909, so she was either a year old or she was 5, hard saying. Her mother remarried. She married a guy called Henry Casson. He ran the Opera House in Lawton, Oklahoma. So they moved from San Antonio to Lawton, Oklahoma. And the Opera House was like a big performance hall. Joan, whose nickname was Billy and whose real name was not Joan, her nickname was Billy. So she got to hang out at the Opera House and got to watch all sorts of vaudeville acts. It reminds me a bit of Roscoe Arbuckle. He got his interest by sleeping backstage because he had nowhere to go and kind of grew up around the stage and lived practically in the local vaudeville hall. So she got to see all sorts of acts. She did not know that Casson, her stepfather, she didn't know he wasn't her biological father until much farther into her childhood when her brother told her later. She always wanted to be a dancer. She cut her foot when she was little, about 3 years old. And she cut it really seriously. She had 3 surgeries. Oh, she must have been a little bit older than 3 because she couldn't go to school. So she must have been 6. For 18 months, she couldn't go to school and she couldn't dance. And dancing was everything to her. Now, remember, her father is running this opera house. Well, in June of 1917, they had to move rather quickly to Kansas City, Missouri, because her stepfather was accused of embezzling. He wasn't acquitted, but he was blacklisted in Lawton, Oklahoma. And that's why they moved. He put her in boarding school, St. Agnes Academy. Then her parents separated and she stayed on. Her mother had no money, so she stayed on as a worker student. She did cooking and cleaning, and she spent more time doing that than studying. She was sort of the Sarah Crew of her own life. She then went to Rockingham Academy, also as a worker student. She had her first serious relationship with a trumpet player named Ray Sterling, and he encouraged her to study. He could see that she was very smart. She enrolled in 1922 in Stevens College, and at that point she wrote that her birth date was 1906. I guess she just compromised between 1904 and 1908. She left the school after a few months. Her education never really went beyond primary school. She just never completed education at all. Spotty attendance and then dropping out. She was seen by a producer, and he put her in a 1924 show called Innocent Eyes at the Winter Garden Theater on Broadway. So, started out big. She was married in 1924 to a saxophone player. She liked those musicians. They didn't stay together very long. She never really talked about her first marriage, kind of pretended it didn't exist. She asked Lowe's publicist if he could get her a screen test, and he managed to. She got an MGM contract and was paid $75 a week. It was a lot of money in those days. We're talking, not quite mid-20s. She had actually been in Los Angeles, did whatever it was she was doing there, and had returned back home to Kansas City, kind of disappointed, when she was offered a contract and went back to Hollywood. She had to borrow $400 to get back to Hollywood. In 1925, she was included in the movie Lady of the Night as the body double for Norma Shearer. Big star. In several other silent films, she was a bit player, but she got no billing. Her name wasn't actually on there. So this is when they changed her name at MGM. First, they had a public contest. I'd forgotten about this. They in a movie magazine, they had a contest called Name That Star, and the public got to vote on what she should be named. And the first name they came up with was Joan Arden, but they discovered that it was already taken and they wanted something unusually unique, not spoken for. So she became Joan Crawford. She hated it. She thought Crawford sounded like crawfish. She was frustrated with the small roles that she was getting. And so she decided she was very good at self-promotion. She was nothing if not completely obsessed with her career and herself. She became a star. This is a quote from somebody who knew her, somebody important who knew her at the time. Joan Crawford became a star because Joan Crawford decided to be a star. She started going around town all day, every day, from dance hall to dance contest. Those were very popular in those days. Dancing was a big thing. They had tea dances in the afternoon at cafes. She went to all of them, dances at hotels and dances on beaches. And she entered every contest she could to get her name out there. And she won a fair percentage of the contests that she performed in. And it worked. MGM gave her a bigger part. She regarded Norma Shearer, for whom she had been a body double, as her nemesis. Shearer was married to Irving Thalberg, which, big shot, kind of Steven Spielberg of his heyday. So she got the first choice for all the plum roles. And Joan Crawford was not quiet about saying, well, how can I compete with Norma? She sleeps with the boss. In 1926, she was named a Wampus Baby Star. This was some list that came out every year and highlighted the rising new stars in Hollywood. She was on the list that year with Mary Astor, Dolores Del Rio, Janet Gaynor, and Fay Wray. Janet Gaynor, who was she related to? I think Janet Gaynor was related to the kid in the Addams Family. No, she was related to somebody who became a child star. I have so much useless information floating around in my head. Related. I know this is podcast gold, isn't it? But I want to tell you the truth. I don't want to get it wrong. She had one child, but that's not who I'm thinking of. She was the aunt. I'm pretty sure. Oh, she made her Broadway debut in the 1971 film. Oh, I'm sorry, the adaptation of the 1971 film, Harold and Maude. Epic. So hang on just one second, because I absolutely am. Now this is going to drive me insane. I believe he was her nephew. Well, there's her obituary. I don't want to read that. I will let you know, because this is going to drive me crazy. So back to Joan Crawford, who was listed with Janet Gaynor as a baby star for 1926. It took her a year of really pushing, and she became the romantic lead with all of the top MGM stars. Ramon Navarro, who was terribly murdered. It was horrible. John Gilbert, William Haynes, who got outed and became the interior decorator to Hollywood, interior decorator to the stars, interior decorator, for example, to Marilyn Monroe. And Tim McCoy, who doesn't ring a bell for me. She made a movie with Lon Chaney and credited Lon Chaney for teaching her more about acting just by watching him than for anyone else in her entire career. In 1927, she made Spring Fever, which was the first of 3 movies she made with her friend, William Haynes. Shortly after that he left acting. They were going to make a big scandal out of it. In 1928, she starred in Our Dancing Daughters, and this was her big breakthrough. I remember her dancing in this crazy kind of wild leg flinging chorus dancing that they did in the early 20s. She became the symbol of the modern 1920s femininity. She was one of the very first flappers. She rivaled Clara Bow, which I find very hard to understand. Clara Bow had it. Clara Bow was the it girl. And Colleen Moore was sort of the comedic flapper. And Olive Thomas was in the original movie Flapper. I had no idea that Joan Crawford was considered the quintessential flapper. Then she hit a series of hits. She was the idealized vision of the free-spirited, all-American girl. F. Scott Fitzgerald said this about her. A lot of people don't know, because I don't think they don't emphasize this in American literature class in high school. F. Scott Fitzgerald was hugely successful at writing scripts for movies in Hollywood. He said, Joan Crawford is doubtless the best example of the flapper, the girl you see in smart nightclubs, gowned to the apex of sophistication. Toying with iced glasses, with a remote, fairly bitter expression, dancing deliciously, laughing a great deal with wide, hurt eyes, young things with a talent for living. The change from silent films, 27, I believe, was the jazz singer, that changed from silent films to talkies was a paradigm shift for a lot of actors and actresses. Uh, Turning to sound was risky. Some of them had really strong regional accents that they could not get rid of. It was a halcyon days for vocal coaches in Hollywood. Some had funny timbre to their voices. They were screechy or high or too low or whatever, and they didn't do okay. And some of them just gave up. They didn't even try. They refused to do talkies. MGM was the last studio to switch to sound, and she was included in the first sound film MGM ever made, called The Hollywood Review of 1929. She sang. She did very well in it. She had worked really hard to get rid of her accent. She had, Midwest accent. She was obsessive. She would practice reading newspapers and magazines and books and looking up any word she didn't know how to pronounce and repeating it 15 times. She had just had this obsessive way of doing it. Her first starring talkie role, the first one she was in was The Review of 29. But in 29, she was the star of Untamed with Robert Montgomery, who was one of the most popular stars in the world. She started to get more sophisticated roles, not just the giddy flapper type. In 31, she made 5 films, 3 of them with Clark Gable. Her first one with Clark Gable was Dance Fools Dance, so they weren't that sophisticated. All 3 movies she made with him were very popular. Next, she co-starred in the movie Grand Hotel, which won Best Film in 1932. I think Norma Shearer and Greta Garbo, Constance Talmadge. It's been so long since I've seen it. Then she made a movie that got lost. It's called The Lost Crawford Film. Letty Linton, and it was withdrawn from circulation as a movie at the time because there was a complaint about it being plagiarism. I don't know more than that. Somebody has it somewhere. I guess they found a copy of it and it is somewhere, but it's almost impossible to find. She became number 3 in the box office list. She was on the top of the list until 1936. Now, what that was popularity in her movies, which movies made the most money. In 33, she made Dancing Lady, in which she got top billing with Fran Chautone and Fred Astaire. In 36, she made The Gorgeous Hussy, which was a big hit. But by the late 30s, her popularity had begun to decline. In 37, Life magazine called her the queen of the movies and did a whole thing on her. But then she started to slip from number 7 of the top 10 to number 16. And in 1938, she was called Box Office Poison by the Independent Theater Owners Association of America. So what that meant was they would name the actors who got such a high salary that their ticket sales didn't bring in enough to offset that salary, and it hurt the theaters. So in June 29th of 1943, she disillusioned with her contract with MGM, got out of her contract. They paid her $100,000 for the last film to get out of it. I don't know. I don't understand that. July 1st of 1943, so like 2 or 3 days later, she made a 3-movie deal and signed a contract with Warner Brothers for $500,000. In 1944, she made the movie Hollywood Canteen. It was all about GIs who would go to these places around the country. This one was in Hollywood. They were 24/7 halls where they could get a meal and hot coffee and could dance and had music, all kinds of live entertainment. And young women would get the opportunity to go get gussied up and hang out and dance with these GIs who were on their way to the front or on a break from the war. And they made this movie with all kinds of famous stars acting like real people in this canteen. She really wanted to be in the movie Mildred Pierce, and they made her do a screen test, which was quite offensive because she was a big star. But they chose her, and it was a big success in 1945. She got an Oscar, and it revived her career. She got a second nomination for an Oscar in 47 for the movie Possessed. In 52, she was out of her contract with Warner Brothers, and she made The Sudden Year for RKO and got a third Academy Award nomination. She did many radio roles, began appearing on TV in the 50s. In 59, she did a pilot for the Joan Crawford show. I don't think it went anywhere. In 53, she returned to MGM and made the movie Torch Song. In 54, she made the cult classic Johnny Guitar, and it's been there forever since I've seen it, but she was very hard-boiled. I want to say she owned a tavern. I think it was kind of cowboyish. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen it. And then in 1961, she made the work of art that was known as Whatever Happened to Baby Jane with Bette Davis. And Bette Davis got nominated for an Oscar. I don't know how Joan Crawford felt about that. I didn't see it written down. This movie was a gigantic success. So it hit the theaters in 61. First I heard of it, I was towards the end of grade school. They put it on TV. It was the hot topic. That's all I can say. It was a crazy movie. In 64, she made a sequel with Davis called Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. But she was so the story is that Bette Davis harassed her so badly that Crawford ended up in the hospital and had to be replaced by Olivia de Havilland. Crawford heard that she was replaced on the radio. In 68, she was the guest star on the I Love Lucy show. In 68, her daughter Christina, who was 29 and was a regular player on a soap opera, The Secret Storm, she needed sudden ovarian surgery. And Joan stood in for her in her role. Now, Joan was, 68, 64, maybe she was 64, maybe she was 60. But she stood in for her daughter and played the 28-year-old part for over a week. There were ugly things said about that later, I'll tell you about. In 69, she did the TV show Night Gallery. And this was actually the first time Steven Spielberg ever directed a professional actor. He directed Joan Crawford on television. She did several other cameos on television. Let's talk about her personal life. I didn't know this. In 1929, she eloped with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Now, he was Hollywood royalty. He's the stepson of Mary Pickford with the little curls, and the son of Douglas Fairbanks Sr., the dashing pirate who was always, he had a big mustache and he was always swinging through the room. They were opposed to this marriage, and they did not invite the happy couple to their home for the first 8 months of their marriage. Mary Pickford was an astute businesswoman. She got together with Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks, and I want to say, oh God, I always forget his name. Can't remember his name. I can see his face. They formed United Artists, and she ran her own professional business dealings. Very astute businesswoman. So eventually, Fairbanks Sr. decided to allow them into his life again. He accepted her. He called her Billy, and she called him Uncle Doug. Her husband, Junior, and her father-in-law, Senior, would go golfing together and leave her with Mary Pickford. Mary Pickford never warmed to her. The men would go golfing, and Joan Crawford would be at the Fairbanks Douglas house, Pick Fair, by the way. And Mary Pickford would go lock herself in her bedroom and just abandon Joan alone, waiting for her husband to come back. In May of 33, they got divorced. These were the days of no fault divorce didn't exist. You had to have a reason. That's why people would hire private eyes to burst into the room and take a fake compromising picture so that they could get divorced. She claimed mental cruelty, called him jealous and suspicious. They had loud arguments. In 35, so a couple of years later, she married Franz Chotone, who was this quiet actor that she appeared in a movie that I mentioned that I forget now which movie it was. He was really into stage theater. He was not into movies. He was in movies and he was highly acclaimed, but he preferred stage acting. They built a small stage theater in her house, and they together put on plays to entertain their friends. Like kids, you know. He wanted to be a stage actor. He had no interest in being a film star. This drove her nuts. She kept pushing him, and it didn't work. She had 2 miscarriages. He began drinking. There were allegations of, not good behavior. And in 39, they were divorced. They healed their relationship and became friends again later. And in fact, when he died, she was given the job of scattering his ashes in 1968. In July of 42, she married Philip Terry after knowing him for 6 weeks. So it'll come as no gigantic surprise that by 45, they were separated and divorced by 46. So they stayed married for a little less than 4 years. And she claimed mental cruelty. And then in May 10th of 1955, she married her 4th husband. Remember, we don't talk about the first husband. She married her 4th husband, Alfred Steele, in Las Vegas. He was a wealthy businessman and was a big shot in Pepsi. He was in Pepsi Cola. I think she made commercials for them at one point. In 59, he died. And although she was single, now we're going back in time now. So 59, he died. Period. Although she was single in 1940, she adopted a child. And, there's this running narrative throughout her life about not bonding with names. It's so weird. So no, her real name is not Joan. So she adopted this little girl, and on her birth certificate or adoption papers, her name was Joan. But then she changed it to Christina. A year later, she adopted a son with Philip Terry because they were then together. The birth mother, when she found out that Joan Crawford had adopted her baby, she tried to blackmail Joan. And I didn't say what was the blackmail, or did they really mean extort? Crawford gave the baby back. And this child went on to have a really awful life. It was not wanted back by the father because it wasn't the bio father. It was the product of an affair. The mother had an affair. And the father didn't want to welcome this baby back and had to be adopted out again. It's very sad. This was a huge loss to Joan, I can imagine, right? In 42, she and Terry adopted another boy, Philip Terry Jr., and after her divorce in 46, she changed his name to Christopher. Not his last name, his first name, to Christopher. He had a very troubled life. He was expelled many, many times. He went to a military academy and got kicked out of that. He was married at the age of 18, and his wife had a baby when he was 19. In 61, he tried to introduce the baby to Joan and said, "Oh, look, that's your grandmother." And Joan said, "I'm nobody's grandmother. I'm Aunt Joan." Christopher, the son, never saw Joan in person again. He was very hurt. In 73, she 73, he had a daughter who got really sick. It was a life-threatening situation, and he called his mother for help. I'm assuming financial help or pulling strings in the medical community. And her response to him on the phone while his child was at death's door was, "She's not my granddaughter. You were adopted." In 47, she adopted twin girls, fraternal twins, and they grew up with Steele. He was their father figure. They regarded him as their father. One was named Cynthia. The other was named Kathy. Cynthia died in 2007. Kathy died in 2020. So after Steele died, I believe it was 59. Did I get that right? All these dates. Yes, he died in 59. Joan was the first woman on the board of directors for Pepsi. She also became their goodwill ambassador. That's why I thought she made ads. She did things, made little public service Pepsi announcements. She traveled more than 100,000 miles a year pushing Pepsi. She retired in 73 at the age of 65-ish. February 2nd of 1970, she got the Cecil B. DeMille Award at the Golden Globes. These dates are all over the place. I'm not really quite clear why. So she got the Cecil B. DeMille Prize before she retired, but there you go. In 62, she wrote her autobiography, A Portrait of Joan. And in 71, she wrote another autobiography called My Way of Life. In April 8th of 73 was her last official public appearance. She was at an event called Legendary Ladies, and it was sold out. She was so popular at that event that when she left, her limousine was surrounded by more than 200 fans, and they had trouble getting out of the parking area. She was last seen in general at a book party at the Rainbow Room, hosted by Rosalind Russell. On May 10th, 1977, she died of a heart attack. And this is sad. 4 days before she died, she had given away her Shih Tzu named Princess Lotus Blossom because she had become too weak to care for her dog. She died 4 days later. Her ashes were put next to Steele, where he was interred in New York. In her will, she very publicly disinherited her daughter, Christina, parentheses Joan, and her son, Christopher, parentheses Philip Jr. Both of them challenged it. Both of them settled for $55,000 apiece. Her hands and feet were enshrined at Grauman's Chinese at a star on the Hollywood Walk. In 1999, she was voted the 10th greatest female star of classic American cinema. Playboy listed her as number 84 out of 100 in the sexiest women of the 20th century. And she today, to this day, has a very large gay following because they identified and sympathized with her struggle for success. Then we have to talk about Mommy Dearest. It was published in 78. It was written by her daughter, Christina. It alleged emotional and physical abuse. I recommend watching it. It's just standalone, a good movie of its own. Faye Dunaway plays her and really did a powerful job. The film was made in 81. So before I tell you the comments from her family members, I will point out that each of us is a different parent to each individual child that we have. It doesn't even matter how close in age they might be. You are a different person to each of your children. I think we probably all look at it from the point of view of maybe birth date and time, astrology, karma, personality you're born with. The dynamics are different. And I say that because her daughter Christina wrote this book, which was very harsh. Her twins, the two little girls, they denied it. They filed a suit against their sister Christina for defamation of their mother's character. And that was settled for $5,000, which really is not very much money. Despite what the twins had to say, some famous people had something else to say about it. Helen Hayes, June Allison, and Vincent Sherman all said that she was a strict disciplinarian and that they saw it in action. I would say this. Those were all earlier stars. Those girls came around a little bit later, and perhaps, I'm just playing devil's advocate, perhaps she softened a bit. Perhaps something odd happened, changing that child's name. I don't know what that did to her. Who knows? Who knows? Many friends and fellow stars denied there was ever a problem. Myrna Loy called it a fantasy. Christina's ex said that Joan was always nice to him. But I'll say this. My grandmother had a phrase for people like that. Street angel, home devil. Christina claimed that Joan tried to steal her soap opera role. Remember, she had emergency surgery, and her mother stepped into this role. Now, there's some nuance here. That part was a person in her 20s, and she was in her, well, at least her 50s, maybe her 60s. The producer of the show said, well, no, we did offer it to her to do that. And she was just a place saver for Christina, who couldn't work because she had surgery. So we didn't want to hire somebody new, and she was already written into the week's schedule. I would say there's some serious interpersonal dynamics around control and narcissism going on in that family. I'll just say that. Bette Davis said, I was not Miss Crawford's biggest fan, but I still did respect her talent. What she did not deserve was that detestable book. Horrible. So that's the story of Joan Crawford. Now, stay tuned. Keep checking. I don't have an exact date for you, but Deborah and I are getting together to do a few videos, and one of them will be a deeper dive into the life of Joan Crawford, and keep your eye open for it. So, one more bit of advice from Jo Crawford. No more wire hangers. Slung of oil. Slancha.